we are going to talk about how to solve equations by adding and subtracting. So first we're going to start with our goal, and our goal is going to be I can apply properties of addition and subtraction to solve one-step equations. So basically what I just said we're going to learn how to solve equations using addition and subtraction, just kind of in fancier language. Since we're at the beginning of a new unit, a new idea, we're going to define some things so that if I say them going forward, you know what they mean. So equivalent equations are equations that have the same solution. So maybe we're solving for x and we go through and we find out that x equals 3, and then we have another equation that looks different but still x equals 3. Those equations would be equivalent because they equal the same thing. Next, we're going to relearn additive inverse. The additive inverse is a number and its opposite that add to be 0. So if I had 3, its additive inverse would be negative 3, because 3 plus negative 3 is 0. Or if I had 7, how about let's do negative 7, its additive inverse would be positive 7. So now let's talk about the addition property of equality. The addition property of equality says that adding the same number to each side of an equation produces an equivalent equation. So if I had 3 plus x equals, let's do 10, if I add 4 to both sides, this property of equality lets me do that because I'm changing them by the same amount on each side. So it's still going to work. It's still going to be equal to each other. And then the subtraction property of equality is just the same thing but with subtraction. So let's write it. Subtracting the same number from each side subtracting the same number from each side of an equation and same thing as addition property, produces an equivalent equation. So really similar to the one above, if I had x plus 8 equals negative 3, and I subtract 11 on each side of the equation, of each side of the equal sign, I'm changing them by the same amount. So this is still going to be equivalent, even though I've subtracted 11 from both sides. Which leads us to our next blurb. Move it over a bit. So when you're solving an equation, what you do on one side of the equation, so we're going to write in 1, you must do on the other side. And that's because of these properties up here. If I have 3 plus x plus 4 equals 10, but my original problem didn't have this 4, I haven't changed it by the same amount. I need to change them by the same amount. So, example 1. When we're solving an equation, our goal is to get the variable by itself. In this case, our variable is x. So our goal is to get x by itself. My first step is I'm going to rewrite the equation in my own handwriting. And that's what's going to go in this line. Then I'm going to use my additive inverse. I'm going to scoot this up a little bit. I'm going to use my additive inverse, and the number that's by the x, I'm going to add my additive inverse. So the additive inverse of, we're going to say this is negative 5, is positive 5. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to draw a line through the equal sign so that I know the equal sign always goes on this line, and I kind of keep both sides of my equation lined up. So this was the addition property of equality. That lets me add 5 to both sides without creating a different equation. So now, x minus 5 plus 5, so negative 5 plus 5 is 0 because of the additive inverse. Those are going to cancel each other out. They're going to add to be 0. So I'm left with just an x equals 3 plus 5 is 8. And then I'm done because x is by itself. I have 1x. That's what my goal would be. So that step is called simplifying, because all I did is I just added the numbers together. Example 2 is the same thing. I'm going to start by writing my equation. Well, first, I have to identify what I'm looking for. What am I solving for? Y is the only number that I don't know. I want to find out what y is. So I'm going to rewrite it. And then, using the addition property of equality, I can add the opposite of this negative 7, which would be positive 7. I'm going to add it to both sides. So I'm going to call it the addition property of equality. Draw a line through my equal sign so that I keep it lined up. Then I have negative 7 plus 7 is 0. So I would just have y equals 13 plus 7 is 20. And all I did was I just added the numbers together, so I simplified. All right, let's flip to the back. We had one more adding and then some subtracting. Let me get this lined up. Wonderful. So, still same thing. Which variable am I looking for? What am I trying to figure out? In this case, it's k. I'm going to rewrite the equation. Gonna draw the line through it so I can keep it all lined up. I want to get k by itself. I could add 6, but then I would have k plus another number over here, and that wouldn't be very helpful. So I'm going to take the number next to k. I want to get rid of the number next to k by using the additive inverse and adding the opposite. So plus positive 2. That was the addition property. Of equality. So negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Okay, the equal sign goes on my line. Negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. I have 1k, k is by itself. So I'm done, and all I did was I added, so I simplified. Subtraction is going to work the same way. What I'm looking for in this one, the only number I don't know is w, so I want to get w by itself this time. And this time I can subtract for both sides or add the additive inverse. So I'm going to start by writing my equation. Then I want to get w by itself. So I have a plus 8. So I'm going to add a negative 8 to both sides. Oops. So since I added, it'll be the addition property of equality. And I gotta simplify. Eight plus negative 8 ends up being 0, so I have w equals 24 plus negative 8 is 16. I have 1 w. I'm done. This one, our goal is to get k by itself. We want to find out what k is again. I'm gonna write my equation. Then I can subtract 12 from both sides because adding a negative is the same as subtracting. That's something we learned a couple weeks ago. If you're kind of rusty, that's okay. I'm just telling you now that this adding a negative that we did up here is going to be the same as subtracting. So I can subtract 12 from both sides. And that's the subtraction property of equality. And then I'm going to go ahead and simplify. So 12 minus 12 is 0, so I'm just left with k. 40 minus 12 is 28. You might have to do it the longer way. I've done it enough times in my life that I just kind of know. But it's okay if you need to like borrow and do the long subtraction. I have 1k. That was my goal. I'm done. All right, last one. I have negative 27 equals y plus 5. Y is the only number I don't know, so I want to get y by itself. I want to find out what that is. I'm going to write my equation. Draw a line through the equal sign. And then since I have a y plus 5, I'm going to subtract 5. Because 5 minus 5 is going to be 0. So 5 minus 5 is 0. I'm left with y. My equal sign goes on this line I drew. And then negative 27 minus 5 is negative 32. So this step, subtracting for both sides, this is subtraction property. And when you add them together, that's simplifying. Okay, I ended up with 1y. That was my goal. So I'm done. Alright, now I need you to write 2 questions that you still have. Yes, you have to write questions. Yes, there has to be 2. This is going to help you in our stations. And I'm sure we went through that kind of fast, so there's probably something you might be a little confused about, even if it was just like, I don't understand this one part of example 1. It doesn't have to be a huge question. But bring your questions to me, write them down so you can remember them.